thought he was joking. Any of you who know Miles in the class of '69 knows him well. Remember what Steve Hanley said of Miles. Miles, you're just an enigma. Then the official program arrived in the email, and I was listed as a speaker. The enigma was not joking. My first thought was pure horror. Hadn't I already given a chapel talk 50 years ago? Every senior had to give a chapel talk. I don't recall much of what I said, if anything of what I said back then, but I thought that box was ticked. But roped in, I thought I had two choices. The first, the most brilliant of choices, would be to introduce Greg Stragnell, who's come all the way from England, and he could quickly introduce Rick Robertson, who confessed at Miles' beach party on Thursday that he had never given a chapel talk. I thought I was scot-free. And I would be helping a fellow senior to finally graduate from web proper. The other choice, the other option, would be to speak to you myself. You're the witness of my choice. Good luck. Delightful to be back here in what we used to call the house that Demerits built. My fondest memory of this chapel was on the days we were finally going to be dismissed for a holiday. Can't you hear it now? Those boys' voices, not singing hymn 186, shouting it, on our way rejoicing as we homeward move. But I want to share some thoughts with you today about memories, values, and meaning, with a focus on the web experience. Shakespeare, of course, said it best, what's past is prologue. Psychologists have recently been studying memory, and you know, if you watch Netflix, there's already a series about memory. I guess it's the sign of the time that the topic has really emerged. What they tell us is that the most significant of our memories, the most lasting of our memories, are formed in adolescence. Not surprising why. We're doing things, for good or bad, for the very first time in our adolescence. It's our first struggle of independence, becoming ourselves, the first drink, maybe, first smoke, or for some of us, first love, in fact, one that has lasted from our class for more than 50 years. But thinking back 50 years to 1969, and thank you, Taylor, for looking back at that significant year, we were completing our high school experience and near the end of our adolescence, and web at that time serves as the basis for many of our memories. But think of the world back then, and globalization was not a term, no internet, no iPhones, no laptop computers, man hadn't landed on the moon until after we graduated. We in '69 had much more in common with the world of the class of '59, who celebrate their 60th today, than it does with the class of 2014, who left Webb 5 years ago. Webb of '69 was a school with little diversity. African Americans and Asians were the distinct exception. Our headmaster at the time, Fred Hooper, I remember, had trouble pronouncing the name of a Thai student, Tanyusak Tipmabuter. Fred's solution, let's just call you Tippy. Well, speaking of nicknames, we had plenty, King Fut Fut the Fool, Twaddle the Etch, and yours truly, King Curdle the Choleric. I think I better skip the nicknames for our faculty. And we dreamed of the day that the school would be co-ed. Back then, before a school dance, Fred Hooper would warn us, boys, don't be tempted by the sound of the swish of skirts. Hard to imagine that guidance in today's web. Web of today is no doubt vastly richer because of diversity and its commitment to the principles of equality, but there are commonalities that exist between the past and the present. So let me try to distill some things that have not changed, maybe what we could call the essence of Webb. Then, as now, Webb prepares you for a journey, a unique journey that each of us must take. Our teachers, whether they taught English or history, wanted us to learn from narratives of those who had taken journeys, who lived as leaders, whether it was Larry Durrell and W. Somerset Maugham, The Razor Edge, or those pilgrims. Please recite Canterbury Tales prologue, Juan na April with the Shora Sota, the Rota March, past Persa to the Rota. Webb encouraged exploration and engagement. Reunions allow us that moment to look back on our journeys. And now, at 50 years out, those of us in the class of '69 on Medicare and with fewer days ahead of us than behind us, it's quite a special moment of reflection. For me, that journey includes that summer of '66 Peccary summer trip. How else would I ever visited scenic South Dakota, population 6? Or walking down and up the Grand Canyon in the same day. I think by the when I finally made it to the top, I think I was dragged by Greg Stragnell, stars were out. Or joining with my teacher, or our teacher, Steve Hanley, at Easter break in '69 to visit Lowndes County, Alabama, a rural backwater situated between Montgomery and Selma. Later that summer, I joined Steve and his wife, Jean, in Lowndes to teach at what was called the Freedom Schools. That experience jars me to this day and has been a profound influence on my personal journey. Back then in that county, 80% of the county's population were African Americans. They owned less than 15% of the land. The average family income for those black families was $900 a year. And between Reconstruction and 1966, no black person was allowed to vote in Lowndes County. And then what about that journey off to college? I drove across America with Steve Sprinkle in his wonderful old red Porsche. It had very limited trunk space, as I recall, just about enough room for a case of Pennzoil. That car needed a can of oil every time we filled up the gas tank. And if you were to be prepared for a journey, you needed to learn how to communicate. And Webb has always had a focus on communication, whether written or verbal. In our day, if you were going to learn how to write, you better learn how to spell. And yes, we had to memorize those Webb School spelling rules. If only I had a copy now, I'd love to refresh my memory. Everyone knows I before E, and then some of you will say, oh, except after A is a neighbor and way. But then we had to learn the real exceptions. Either, neither, leisure, foreign, seas, weird, and better not forget shake. Many of us here today are outspoken. Well, that's also something Webb expected of us. Be ready to stand up and say what you think. We learned early on as ninth graders at those talks that Ramsey Harris made us speak to at the assembly. I recall one assembly when the Vietnam War was raging. The school trustee decided that it would be great to have a member of Congress speak to us. He chose L. Mendel Rivers, a powerful chair of the House Armed Services Committee. He referred to himself as the granddaddy of the war hogs. Well, I had the temerity to speak up and ask him what he thought about President Eisenhower's farewell address, that ominous warning about the military-industrial complex. My recollection is the congressman was a bit surprised to get that question from a high school student. But at its core, Webb is about building character. For some, it was developed on the athletic field, both individually and as part of a team. And above our study hall, mens sana and corpora sano, that healthy mind in a healthy body. For Webb, building character was all about the world of expectations, of standards, and of consequences. We were expected to embody the character of a leader, an expectation ever inscribed in the boys' school motto, Principes non homines, a leader, not a common follower. What does that mean to be a Principes? What are the building blocks of leadership? Well, at Webb we learned honor, trust, and community. The honor code is a way to instill a respect for honesty and a sense of responsibility to do the right thing. Early on, we were taught honor and trust matter. We had to sign that pledge on our exams. That pledge of honor was fundamental in the establishment of community. We learned early on about the consequences of not meeting standards. I still can hear Fred Hooper speaking of a student who somehow had violated one of the many rules. We had a boy here once. He'd then detail what that boy had done wrong, and then he would conclude, and we had to let him go. Well, as a supervisor and manager in my career, I've had to deal with plenty of staff, some who've lied or attempted to cheat or defraud. Whether I was advising a boss or was the boss myself, I was guided by that moral compass I learned about at Webb. Standards need to be upheld. But I'm very glad that the motto for the Webb School for Girls embraces wisdom and friendship along with honor. Wisdom is essential if we are to act for the common good, if we are to learn to listen and be humble rather than just boastful leaders. And friendship and caring are the center of the community, true community. Yes, it's very special to be part of this Webb community, each of us shaped by the enduring principles to be leaders in our own way. And many of you here today have made friends for life at Webb. I know I have. Friends who knew you when, in those days of youth. Friends you can count on through thick and thin. And now, as memories fade, it is special to have friends, no matter where they are in the world, who can share a laugh, a word, a smile, about moments long ago, while still caring about who you are today. And yes, a special community of friends to stand with you through life. And hopefully, a community ready as ever to sing to each other in full throat the refrain, "On our way rejoicing," as we continue our journeys through this life, enriched forever by our days.